I had a client several years ago. I did 360 interviews for him. It was one of the best set of 360 interviews I'd ever done. Okay. And he was a senior leader, so he was above director, but the story holds perfectly true for a director level, and that dynamic of teaching. And so all the feedback I got from him, his direct reports on him, was phenomenal. They said, like, this guy's amazing.
So far, so good?
People line up to work for him at some point in their career. He could be the next CEO. It's like a pleasure to work for him. You learn so much.
Wow. Okay.
Just going to the teaching point.
Yeah.
But then I pushed, because I'm a coach. I got to say, so what?
Right.
So what more can he be doing?
Right.
And his direct report said this. They said, there's one thing he doesn't do that I wish he would do. He never lets us fail. When we're about to fail, we may not see it, but we're about to run into some issues. He jumps in and saves us. We're super smart, competent people. We're going to learn the most from our own failures. He needs to learn to let us fail so we can learn from that. This is the Brandon Smith Show, and of course, I'm your host, Brandon Smith, and the entire purpose of this show is one singular thing, and that is to help you live a life that much more free from dysfunction. So today, I've got one of my best friends and favorite guests, John Kim, on the show.
Glad to be here. Good times.
We're going to talk about missteps, okay? But specifically, so this is a very specific show. We're going to talk about when you get promoted from manager to director, which often you think, it's just a promotion. It's just more people, more stuff, right? It's great. But that's actually a very different kind of job. You've seen that working with directors and even directors and above as a consultant for many years in your career. That's a different kind of job and it requires different adjustments. So for our show today, when directors mess up, when they get that promotion and they bomb miserably, what does that look like? Okay. So that's what we're going to talk about today.
I like that, for one, is because I think it's really relevant. And it's one thing if you're an individual contributor and you mess up, it's like the size of the mess is smaller. But when you're a director, a lot of times the size of the mess is bigger, and a lot of times it's very public.
Yeah,
right?
Totally.
And that can be very painful.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So before we jump into the topic, anyone who's listened to this show for any period of time would know who you are.
Okay, sure.
But I get new listeners.
That's true.
All the time.
Welcome.
And there are new people super excited to meet you.
Fair enough.
So John, what's the couple of the 3 or 4 bullets that are all that would describe you?
So I teach at business school. So twice a year I have an opportunity to teach 400 students and teach stuff like strategy, management consulting. And then also I'm a consultant's consultant. So I do work with quite a few consulting firms to help them train their newbie consultants. So if you think about the type of things that you and I end up talking about a lot, it's basically how can you help get stuff done when you yourself don't have the authority to do it? Because what does a consultant do but try to figure out in the situation in a short amount of time what's really important and what can really motivate people to move. So I think I'm in the business of helping people move big rocks.
Yeah, and so I would call that leadership. Sounds like very similar things.
That's it.
And you were a consultant for a long time, too. That's also important for people to know.
I appreciate that. It's interesting that it's leadership because I always consider myself a number 2, not a number 1. And it's interesting because I think leadership, a lot of times you always think it's the goose that's in the front, right? So I love being thought of as a leader, but it's interesting. I think that's also possible to do that as a number 2. And I'd be curious if you agree.
I agree completely. They talk about leading from the front, but they also talk about leading from behind.
Which always never sounds as attractive. But I would say super useful, and there's a lot more of number 2 spots than number 1 spots, is what I would say.
Yeah, absolutely true.
Right? So, but that's cool. Thanks for calling me a leader. I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I didn't actually call you a leader. I just said that we described was leadership. See how I did that?
I was fishing for the compliment. Did not land it.
I think that is a good segue, though, into our topic of director, because I think directors lead from the front, but they also lead in kind of a number 2 position.
Right.
Too, and they lead from behind. So when you think about the times when you were typically engaged by a client, would it be, who would you be working with? Would you be working with directors, VPs, SVPs, any and all of the above?
Yeah, I think any and all of the above. One thing that's really important is a lot of times the directors are your client counterparts. So it's the director's boss a lot of times who actually signs the statement of work, who brought you in, who has the relationship. And they actually have the benefit of actually seeing the forest for the trees, right? So, they might be over many functions of which one the director works at. So, but a lot of times the director they're the one who's actually going to help it happen. So they have the domain expertise. They know where all the bodies are buried and the problems are. And a lot of times, in my opinion, the directors, the managers, they're kind of the glue that holds the place together.
Yeah.
So
they're doing a lot of the work, involved in more of the execution of the work.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's fun in a way. I was recently with a set of 25 kind of associate director level people, and part of the challenge is, for consultants at least, is you're managing up, managing down, and managing your clients. And a lot of times those three don't always line up. So as a director, your role is to really kind of navigate that.
Yeah, absolutely. So for the folks who are listening who maybe aren't in like typical corporate roles, so we're using director as a kind of placeholder. So this is somebody they went from individual contributor and then they moved up into manager. So now I'm managing other individual contributors. And then I became a senior manager. I've been doing this for a while and I'm really good at this. Got promoted to senior manager. Then you get promoted to director. And the difference of director between a manager is directors now have managers reporting to them with teams underneath them. So I think some organizations don't use that term, but that's essentially what we're looking. We're looking for a manager of managers. So now you're managing other managers.
Yep.
And then the VP is the same kind of thing. Then you have directors that have managers. So the scale just keeps building. But it's a big difference to go from managing individual contributors to now managing managers. That's a lot. It's a very more of a stretch than people think it is.
I think so. I think also it's fair to say, it's definitely worth doing, and it's very critical for a lot of organizations that you have people like that who are really good. And for some people, they don't really enjoy it. I think it's okay 5 years in to say, given a choice, I would rather not manage teams of teams.
Yeah, totally. Because you're also further away from the work.
Yep.
And it's a different kind of role.
Yeah.
So let's talk about when we think about, because you and I were talking about this the other day, because I've had several recent experiences of people that have moved into this role of director that were not either well-equipped or really don't have the disposition for it.
Yeah, sure.
And it's turning into, you can see it's going to become a train wreck. So when you think about some of the missteps, what's one that comes to mind for you? Something that is definitely a role of a director that sometimes people overlook.
Yeah, I think you and I, speaking about it, we talked about the idea of being a teacher. One is...
I think you used the term high school teacher, which I thought was so cool.
Yeah. I actually had some good high school teachers. But no, absolutely. Like when you're going from being... Let's say you're going, just using the high school analogy, if you're going from being on the junior varsity team, like you're not great, but you're kind of learning the ropes and you're getting better at playing the sport.
Yeah.
Right? So when you're junior varsity, your goal is just to become on the varsity team in high school, right? Of course. And so a lot of times the reason you got promoted to director is because you were actually pretty good at what you did. Right?
Yeah.
If you're dropping the ball all the time, you're always going to be on the junior varsity team or not on a team. So one is congratulations, you were actually somewhat successful. So you're on the varsity team. But if you think about being a director, it's not about being the superstar director and then everybody who works for you is just kind of your vassal, right?
Yeah.
It's not that, right? So, if you really are going to be a really impactful director, a lot of times it means you are kind of like a high school teacher. So you're teaching other people how to become varsity players.
Yeah.
Right? So when you think about teachers, think back to like not your bad teachers, but your good teachers. It's going to be people who are like really patient, who made it very clear what it looks like, who understood you as a person, right? Bring you along. Because at the end of the day, teaching is not about how well you say things, but about how well people hear and actually take it up. Right? So, no, I think high school teacher is not a bad
Yeah, I love that.
archetype.
I was doing a session a few months ago on executive presence. And I was asking the group, I said, what does executive presence mean in this company?
Right.
And they wanted to use a basketball analogy. So it kind of goes to that really well. And I said, so is executive presence like that leader? And often executive presence pops up at the director level, VP level.
Right.
You're saying, oh my gosh, look at her, look at him. They've got
Right.
executive presence.
Right.
I said, is it the person that dunks or the person that passes the ball? They're like, it's the person that passes the ball. It makes everyone around them better.
Right.
It's the person with lots of assists. Like they pass the ball and other people score. They're not the ones scoring, to your point. So it's a lot of that teaching and educating, which then bleeds in things like delegation, making sure you're delegating. So you're not scoring as much as you're passing, which is delegation, and then you're equipping people to do that work.
And that's I love that idea of passing, right? It makes me think of John Stockton, Utah Jazz, right? He he led the league in assists, passing the ball to Karl Malone. Delegating, it's interesting in passing the ball. Why do people, do you think, tend to not pass the ball as much as they could or should? Because I think part of it, I know of directors who don't pass the ball is because they don't have trust and faith in the people who are receiving the ball. Like they would rather shoot than pass the ball because they feel if they pass the ball, we're not going to score.
Yeah.
And so there could be a lot of...
I think to your point earlier, your analogy earlier, you were on the JV team,
right,
and you were great at scoring,
right,
and then you get moved up to the varsity team. And why'd you get moved up to the varsity team?
Because you were good.
Because you were great at scoring.
Yeah.
So you think I just have to do what I was doing more of or harder. So I did not intend for this show to be a show of nothing but analogies, but I'm going to throw another one. So here comes another one. So I remember there was an interview, another sports analogy, but this is an interview with Greg Maddux, famous Hall of Famer, pitcher for the Atlanta Braves. Arguably, maybe not the best thrower of history, but one of the best pitchers because he could throw any pitch anywhere. Super smart guy, knew how to get into hitters' heads. And he made this comment. He said, the difference between a really good pitcher and a great Hall of Fame pitcher is when a good pitcher gets into trouble, the pitcher throws harder, tries to do the same thing harder. When a great pitcher gets into trouble, they throw softer, which is so counterintuitive. So what we're talking about here is being counterintuitive. Like you got promoted because you were really great at this thing, and now all of a sudden you need to stop doing that thing and teach other people to do the thing. And I think the other part too is when you're a manager and you have direct reports, those are individual contributors. A lot of them might always want to be individual contributors. They may not desire to have your job. But if you're a director and you have managers under you, they probably desire to have your job, right? Because the next step of a manager is to be a director.
Like, when will this person leave already, right?
So you need to grow and groom them so you can get promoted and one of them can step up and take your job. It's a different kind of a role, but people often don't see that subtlety in there.
It's interesting, too, using that thought of, really great pitchers actually are willing to throw softer, right? To go with a different competency, not the one that really brought them there. It makes me also think a little bit around if you're really good at one thing, the question is how much marginally are you going to get better at that thing if you really are at the expert level? Isn't it really useful to learn a different thing and mix those things together?
Yeah.
So kind of using a superhero analogy or something like that. If the Hulk or something was really strong on one side of his body, right, the right arm, he just punches with his right arm. Eventually, that's not a really multifunctional superhero at all, right? So I think one thing I heard from Naval Ravikant, which I strongly recommend, he's a VC and he gives a lot of career advice type stuff. One thing he was saying is that it's very possible you can't be the top 1% in the world at something, but it's very possible for you to be the top 5% at 3 different things that you can combine. Right? So if that's true, then what's the thing that brought you from the junior varsity team to the varsity team and now as a high school coach? But you take that and what else can you mix and match that with to create a really unique combination of things? Because I think we'd probably agree too that the problems that you're facing nowadays organizationally in any kind of group that you're in, they're complex problems that you need to bring kind of a host of different things mixed together. Yeah,
and I think to that point, it really does speak to the power of being a generalist to a certain degree, because even though you go up and it feels like you're specializing, a manager, director, senior director, VP, right? It feels like that. Really, you need to have a strong generalist base, a lot of skills you can use because the problems are going to be unexpected. So knowing when to manage, knowing when to delegate, knowing when to make decisions, knowing when not to make decisions, all those kinds of things. There's an art and science to it.
I love that. A lot of times, and I don't know if you believe this is true, but I have an opinion that a lot of business problems are the same. Would you just say general?
I would agree.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is interesting with that, though, is if all business problems are a lot of times the same, why is there so much money made in consulting? And the reason is that the application or making it happen, that's where all the nuance is, right?
Yeah.
So profitability, pretty simple, right? You can raise prices or lower costs. That's how you become more profitable. Like,
Yeah, absolutely.
First year of college, you figure that out. So if that's true, then why are there billions of dollars in profitability projects running? It's because every client organization is a little bit different on how it's going to work. Where I'm going to is, as a director, you know the profitability equation already. And when you have direct reports, the point is each of them are going to implement it a little bit differently.
Yeah.
And so that's where, like, as a high school teacher, you already know the answer. But, like, in reality, if you're a high school teacher and all of your kids are not passing the math exam, you are a bad teacher.
Yeah. I've got a great story to tell about that right after the break. Okay. So stay tuned. When we come back, we're going to talk more about what does it mean to go from manager to director? What are the things you need to be thinking about? And what are the big missteps that we see directors make all the time that really holds them back? Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Here's your coaching minute for the week, presented to you by the Leadership Foundry. Dysfunction in the workplace, it's a pervasive problem. Here's a simple tip to eliminate dysfunction, both in your team, but even in the environments around you. Clarify your team members' roles, goals, and responsibilities. So just spend some time thinking about, does all of my team know? Does each of them know what their role is, what the goals are of the team, and their responsibilities? If the answer is yes, you right there eliminate 50% of all the dysfunction that could come up in your team. If the answer is no, think about how you could do that better. When we don't do that, one of two things happens. Either people overlap work and they step on each other's toes, or you have one person carrying much bigger load while a couple other people are hanging out not doing near as much work. It's one of the big problems in the nonprofit world is a lack of clarity around roles, goals, and responsibilities. So focus on those three things, and I promise you, not only will you eliminate dysfunction, it's going to make your workplace that much more enjoyable. Welcome back from break. Of course, this is the Brandon Smith Show. And before the break, we were talking about what is the big difference of going from manager to director, because that's a shift, that's a change. And I told you I was going to share a story. And so I had a client several years ago. I did 360 interviews for him. It was one of the best set of 360 interviews I'd ever done. Okay. And he was a senior leader, so he was above director. But the story holds perfectly true for a director level, and that dynamic of teaching. And so all the feedback I got from him, his direct reports on him, was phenomenal. They said, like, this guy's amazing.
So far, so good?
People line up to work for him at some point in their career. He could be the next CEO. It's like a pleasure to work for him. You learn so much.
Wow.
Okay. Just going to the teaching point.
Yeah. But
then I pushed, because I'm a coach. I got to say, so what
right.
So what more can he be doing?
Right.
And his direct report said this. They said, there's one thing he doesn't do that I wish he would do. He never lets us fail. When we're about to fail, we may not see it, but we're about to run into some issues. He jumps in and saves us. We're super smart, competent people. We're going to learn the most from our own failures. He needs to learn to let us fail so we can learn from that. So I shared this feedback with him.
Yeah.
And he looked at me and he said, I'm not there yet. But it really is about knowing when and how to let your people fail. They're going to grow from that. So delegate, teach. And part of teaching is accepting missteps, because that's where learning occurs, and not doing it for them. I think that's the big theme in this first bucket that you've kind of lifted up for us, is not doing it for them, but teaching and equipping so people can learn to elevate their leadership and their abilities.
I think that's great. And also to that person, maybe a better situation might even be to kind of stratify, like, what's a high risk situation and a low risk situation.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
So, like, as a high school coach, going back to that analogy, you wouldn't try somebody out in the last 10 minutes of the championship game.
Right, exactly.
That would be frightening for them, frightening for you. So I think a lot of it has to do is maybe being a little bit more creative on, like, part of my goal as a director is to think of what are opportunities for this person that I wouldn't have thought of.
Yeah,
totally. Because it's not the first thing on your list on Monday.
Yep.
Right?
So if I sum up number one, it's teach. Be a high school coach or a high school teacher. Teach versus trying to do it all for everybody. What you and I talked about some other ones. Do you want me to throw in the next one?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Okay. Yep. So the next one that I would throw in is the difference between manager and director is directors now have to start aligning. And what I mean by that is you have to care about what your peers doing to your left and to your right. At the manager level, not so much. You don't have to do that. You can just focus on your job and your team's work.
Right.
But at the director level and every level above that, you've got to start dedicating time to making sure you're noticing, hey, what's she doing over there? And what's he doing over there? And spending time having those conversations so your groups are marching in the same path forward. And you also have to recognize that when you make decisions, they have system implications. And so you need to be thinking about, like, should I talk to HR about this? Should I talk to my boss about this? You got to be thinking about the implications. At the manager level, your system's pretty contained. At director level, you're touching a lot more.
Yeah, that word system level implications is so important, right? It's a lot of times what we find is, and we talk about this at business school too, is that a lot of times organizations are designed for constructive tension. Right?
Totally.
So you have marketing and sales and finance. You all work for the same company. You're not trying to backstab each other, but we're not letting any one of the groups like run ahead. So what that means is...
The problem whenever I'm on a show with you
is
nothing that comes to mind is just analogies. All analogies.
That's how people think. I mean, people think. People remember analogies.
So here's the analogy for this, which is what you were saying.
Do it.
Every organization's a car. Some functions are gas pedal functions. Some functions are brake pedal functions.
Sales is gas. Sales is gas.
Yep. And finance is brake.
That makes sense.
Compliance is brake. Legal is brake. Marketing is gas. I mean, and if you have all gas pedal functions, it's a fun ride, and you go off the cliff in about 3 months, right? And if you have all brake pedal functions, you never leave the parking spot.
Yeah.
But you need both, and those are in tension.
And so, great analogy. It makes me think too, though. Like so much, like you had said, getting alignment across the different functions, so important at the director level, right? Because you're really at the point of friction between those different systems, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know, for me, like, I kind of hate alignment, right? It's like such well, the reason I say that, it's kind of a necessary evil.
It is.
Like, given a choice, you wouldn't spend too much of your brain space on that, right? And so I guess a couple thoughts. One is, organizationally, there's companies where getting alignment is easier than others, right? And then, so in those companies that have a culture, they have a mission, they have a purpose, which you're a big fan of, where overall we have a sense of what the commander's intent is, where we're headed, more or less, I'm going to give you a little bit of grace, even though it's not perfect. We know where we're headed, and more or less we're aligned, right? And then there's also organizations where, no, you actually have to have a meeting or a series of meetings to make sure that we haven't offended each other, right?
Totally.
And that's just so much work to make that happen. Peter Drucker, who we're both a fan of, says that 50% of meetings are a waste of time, right? And that meetings are a sign of organizational dysfunction.
Yeah.
Right? So, just think from a marriage perspective. If you have to have like a family summit every time you're making a decision, that's a problem.
Yeah.
Right? Because the work can't get done. The work can't get done. So.
I love what you said, though, that you're not a fan. It's not fun to align. I don't think anyone really likes it, which is why they don't do it. But then it causes issues because then you'll have, product and design not talking to each other. Right. So they have to come together. What I often will tell my clients is carve out, so if you want a tactical way to do it, you want to be carving out at least 10% of every week on alignment at director level. And every promotion above that's another 10%. So by the time you're a VP, it's 20%, 30%, et cetera. And the practical way to do it would be if you can be intentional about it, make every Friday lunch an alignment conversation. So you invite another director out to lunch and you just say, hey, what's going on in your department? What's going on in your world? Here's what's going on in my world.
I love that.
And you just have some conversation. I've been recommending that to my clients for like the last 2 to 3 years. I've only had one that was able to do it.
Oh, I see.
And he has an administrative assistant. He got the administrative assistant to schedule all these. And he said the first time he went out to one of these, he said it was really awkward and weird. But turns out he found out something that the other director was doing that had they not had that conversation, it was going to blow up because they were going to go in complete opposite directions.
Lunch paid for itself.
So he said, so they committed at the end to do it every month from now on.
Love it.
So that's one way to kind of make it work. But I love your point in this. Most of us don't like to do it. It feels like a waste of time.
And it's interesting that at least in Korea, where I worked for 7 years, like you don't really have a a good functioning business relationship if you don't relate as a person. Now, that's not good for everybody. It's not necessarily applicable in the United States. And honestly, that's exhausting to be like relationally involved with everybody you do business with. That's exhausting. But I mean, sharing food and drink with somebody and just being a little bit civil, gosh, it's the art of conversation. Like, try already.
What'd you email me the other day?
What did I say?
You said, dude, all I do now is I eat, I drink,
I think,
I teach, I talk.
That's about it.
It was good.
There's a lot of money in those 5 verbs, right?
There's a lot of money. Some going out, some coming in.
Yeah, no, sure. A little bit, and we'll go to the last one because we talked about teaching, being a high school coach as a director, to aligning, and we're going to get to the third one. But before we go on that, carving out time to do alignment and not overthinking it and being a human and relating with other directors, I think that's great.
And I think that's a great way to say it. Don't put pressure on yourself. Yeah. You're not trying to solve problems. You're just connecting. What's going on in your world? That could be all you say.
I mean, I think when I talk to students, we talk about networking. I think networking is nothing more than just being valuable to people, right?
Yeah.
Doing favors, getting favors. I mean, it's just, we don't have to overthink it. One idea that I thought of just now, and for somebody like yourself who's been doing this for so many years, is it not easier to align with people when people know who you are? And what I mean by that is they have an idea of what your value systems are. Like, they can guess what you would think, or they would guess how you might decide on something. And also, not only in terms of kind of what your values are, but kind of your management principles.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Because that way, every time you are aligning, it's not an idiosyncratic event.
Yeah.
Right? Tell me.
I agree with that. I think it's an organic process. So it happens over lunch and dinner and all those other things, because that's where you learn. Because in absence of communication, people always assume the worst. Well, there's John and his team over there. I haven't talked to him, and I don't know what he's doing over there. He's probably out for my job, or he's probably trying to blow up my group. So I'm not. So I'm gonna tell everybody not to talk to those people. So I think that happens over time as you kind of get to know each other.
Got it.
So I know speaking of time, we're getting close on it.
Let's do it.
So we've got our third one.
Okay.
All right, so hit me with this one.
I think we had talked about how, as a director, in the Maddox quote, it's like sometimes you have to slow down. You have to slow down to go fast.
Yeah.
Which is super counterintuitive, right?
Absolutely.
So, the idea I think that we had talked about is if you're a director who has multiple managers who have multiple direct reports, I mean, you're like shepherding a family of 30 people or 15 people.
Totally.
So if you're driving, the analogy is you're driving a car and you're in the car by yourself, it doesn't matter if you make U-turns and cut through gas stations to take a right and stuff like that. But if you are the lead car in a caravan or 7 or 8 cars, then all of a sudden, every time you make a U-turn, I mean, that is just like dangerous for everybody, right?
Totally.
So I guess in a way, being a little bit more thoughtful, right? Knowing that if you are changing your mind all the time, reacting on emotion, you're making all these decisions that people have to guess why you made, that is going to have like ripple effects.
Yeah.
And it's just messy work.
Yeah. So, there's some people that pride themselves on the shoot first, ask questions later kind of philosophy of doing work. That works up until you get to be a director. Then it does not work in any kind of normal organization. It doesn't work because you're not being thoughtful. There's not a consistency. Causes a lot of issues.
Yeah, and the impact that you're going to make as a director, you need to think of it in terms of a fraction, right? But you have a numerator and a denominator. The amount of impact that you can make is not you, but it's across the 15 people you work with. And one thing I heard last week, what I thought was very deep, was from a managing director at a consulting firm, and he said, "If as a director, are you willing to be evaluated entirely by your team's performance?" In other words, if your pay bonus, your promotion, your reputation, all of that was only based not on you, take you out, and just your team, would you be scared, proud, excited to see how that would turn out? And sadly, I think a lot of people would say, wow, that really frightens me.
Yeah, totally. So we're getting close on time, so we have enough time for one more analogy.
Okay, do it.
All right, so I'm going to give a personal analogy. So I used to tell people, so I've got 3 kids, and with every kiddo, our world changed. It wasn't quite the same. It's not like, 1 kid, 3 kid, 8 kids, it's the same. It's actually not. It's just kind of like manager, director, VP. It's different. So having the first kid was like whoa, this is really crazy. It's not just us.
Right.
We've got other people, a person we've got to kind of deal with and learn how to do.
I should fund my 401k, right?
Kind of like being a manager for the first time.
Yeah.
It's not just me anymore. I got to be thinking about these other people that are looking to me.
Makes sense.
When we went from 1 kiddo to 2 kiddos, what I'd always tell people is our mobility dropped like a rock. So when you have 1 kiddo, you can go to the baseball game, you can go out to dinner, you just grab them, throw them on your lap, and you go. You're flying somewhere, and they're little. You don't even have to buy a ticket. They just sit in your lap. Maybe you do now, but back then you didn't have to. But when you have 2, it's not so easy to just go someplace. You've got to slow down.
Yeah.
You've got to think about, how do I manage this like group? I'm outnumbered if it's just me and 2 of them, right?
Logistic, yeah.
And then going from 2 to 3 would be kind of the equivalent of going from director to VP. It's all scale. So now minivan has to happen.
Yeah.
You need a third row seat. You have to do that because you can't. Sedans don't work when you've got 3 kids and 3 car seats. You can't fit 3 in 1 row.
Yeah.
So you need to be able to hit a button and just say, get in the van, and that's more like a VP. So I think it ties into this analogy director well, that you have to learn how to slow down. You got to walk in the parking lot together, not just run ahead and say, well, kiddos, just fend for yourself. It's a lot of that slowing down, teaching, and maybe even aligning too.
Yeah, I think that probably if directors out there would have the amount of patience and grace with their direct reports as they have with their most troublesome child, I mean, corporate America would look and feel a lot better, right? Yeah. But it's hard. I mean, it's hard because, one, I think there's a little bit of insecurity there. Like, nobody wants to be embarrassed or do poorly. And I think, like you said, a lot of times parents, and this is true when you see it in, a lot of parents think they're doing a great job by just covering up for their children, right? Which is not always great either. Right?
Yeah.
So but I mean, I guess it's like tough love, but that has like equal parts love and equal parts tough.
Yeah.
Right. Not too much of the other. Right?
I had a client a couple of years ago, and they said, we love him. He's great. His region's the highest performing region in our entire business. Yeah. But we actually think he's covering up for his team. We actually think his team's weaker than it shows, and he's running around doing a lot of stuff for them.
I know a lot of people that look just like that.
To make that region look great. And if we yank him out, because we want to pull him out and put him in corporate, but we think his region's going to just crash and burn if we pull him out. So it was a lot of that kind of work, like, give some tough love and teach and educate. John, man, we're already at time, and I always ask this question, and I have to stick with my traditions, because we talked about traditions earlier today. So what's one life hack you have for us today that, either personally or professionally, something that's been maybe top of mind for you in recent weeks or months, that can help us live a life a little more free from dysfunction? Just good, healthy principles for us.
I don't know about healthy, but something I think in terms of the idea of really being kind of personal development.
Yep.
I think the idea that for us to really get better and really improve professionally, it's a lot about deliberate practice. And so that's a very important word, and we can talk about that on another show or something like that. But the idea is, as a professional,
you see how he just implies he's going to come back on another show? This could have been your last show. It's all about performance,
man. It's repeat business. It's repeat business, right? Repurchase. So for all of us, one thing interesting about being a director is that the feedback loops aren't necessarily there. And so you don't necessarily know how much better or worse that you're getting. So one idea around deliberate practice is, in order for you to get better, you need to try things that are a little bit difficult and painful. And so same thing for me in my life, I think, is that as I'm teaching at Emory and places like that, like, what am I doing to kind of push myself that might be a little uncomfortable because it's the parts that you don't know as well. So we'll see you next time to talk about deliberate practice.
We grow in states of discomfort.
I'm writing it down.
Excellent. All right, and thank you for listening and watching. Of course, catch a show every Sunday when we drop on Facebook Live. And of course, if you're not subscribed on iTunes, you totally need to. And check out The Workplace Therapist. That's where we put all of our old podcasts, which are never old, they're always evergreen, and blog posts and other resources that are there for you to make you not only more effective as a leader, but to eliminate some of that dysfunction that might be popping up in your life. So until our next show, have an awesome week and a great life.